Welcome to the early medieval history of England and how the country came into being. I shall be posting a new episode each week, taking the history from the 5th century through to just before the Norman invasion of 1066. Please give feedback, and if you find it gradely, please click on the like button. And don't forget to leave a comment, I'm keen to improve. Episode 1. The Anglo Saxon invasions begin. Invitation, men only. In 449, Vortigern, who appears to be a king in Kent or local hardman, representing many Roman cities, hired some Jutes as mercenaries to fight the Pictish invaders who had been causing trouble to the Romans since around the 360s or mid-4th century. The Peterborough manuscript of the Anglo Saxon Chronicle informs us that Hengist and Horsa were the men who accordingly duly obliged. With 3 shiploads of Jutes, they put the Picts to flight. There are 5 versions or original copies of the Anglo Saxon Chronicle. From here onwards it will be referred to as the ASC. 3 shiploads recurs throughout the ASC, so might just mean small amount. Let's face it, 3 boatloads back at this time is hardly a lot, even at full capacity, perhaps as many as 50 blokes in each. It does not seem that many men, although we have no accurate figure as to how many were in each vessel. But this suggests the early attacks are by scores of Picts, or perhaps a couple of hundred at most. In return for repulsing the Picts, Hengist and Horsa were awarded the Isle of Thanet, including provisions and clothing, a rich return for their work. They promptly accepted the payment and then invited a few close friends and relatives along to join them. Around 5,000 are the estimates. At this point, the older histories have it that they brought their wives with them. Gibbon, in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, asserts it. John Richard Green, in his Short History of the English People, infers it. Indeed, with this very first wave, it may have been the case. However, in a more realist world, a suggestion in Henrietta Laser's Medieval Women could give us a clue as to what has been seen as a major stumbling block over the Anglo-Saxon conquest. Historians have not been able to agree over why the invasion of the Angles, Saxons, Jutes and probably Frisians was so thorough. Laser points out that after the Norman invasion of 1066, that Norman women were too afraid of the sea crossing to join their menfolk. Now, the Normans were basically the same seafaring stock as the Anglo-Saxons. It does not take too much imagination to think that the invaders of the 5th and 6th centuries deliberately left their womenfolk behind. The women at the same time thinking, what is the joy in being wet, cold and seasick, then sleeping out in cold fields or damp marshes when I could be here, at home, nice, warm, dry and snug, gossiping in front of a roaring log fire and getting drunk with my friends. It is easy to imagine that the wives back home just didn't see the attraction of seasickness, cold and starvation in the same light as their men. And from the other perspective, why do you want your wife and kids along while you are out raping, pillaging on a bloke's boozy holiday abroad? But then once abroad, your perspective changes. Why kill the men and burn their farms when you can sell them as slaves and keep the farms, slaughter, sell or exchange the men and keep the women as concubines or second wives? From the perspective of farming, capturing women and holding some men as slaves would ensure the harvest was still taken in, especially if you sold the husbands as slaves and bought new male slaves. Hence, no starvation would ensue. If they had killed all the indigenous population, starvation would surely follow. This also gives an added reason as to why the English language took over so swiftly from British, Welsh, Celtish, where Latin under the Romans, after 360 years, hadn't. The women would simply have had to learn to speak the language of their new husbands or masters. After all, The invaders are not going to bother to change. They are only here for the plunder. The children would speak the language of their mothers, with whom they spend the most time, and the mothers, in all probability, have had to learn a new language. No option. A few other outstanding questions are also dealt with. Why the Anglo-Saxon invasion was so complete. Also, why English became the language but without gender. There were at least 3, or possibly 4 or 5, close languages with the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Frisians, etc., all vying to be supreme. It is surmised that this is a key reason why gender dropped from use. Simplifying to a single gender with similar words from closely related languages helps keep the syntax without losing any context as the different peoples intermingled. And keeping the women alive answers why there is little change of land and farming use. Yes, the owners have changed in the sense that the invaders are now in charge, but if the women were left to look after these farms, the borders of those farms would remain the same. In Yorkshire, archaeologists have little evidence of one tribe coming along and burning out the farmsteads and later building new ones. This would be the case if you had raiding parties just pillaging, killing everyone, and then settling at a later stage. The boundaries would change, the burnt-out buildings rebuilt in a different manner and probably in a slightly different location. However, taking the proposition that only the men were being slaughtered or sold and the wives kept as slaves, wives or concubines, then a different picture suddenly emerges. Far from burning and pillaging, the invaders would perhaps go out of their way to preserve the farmsteads and ensure they have the means to keep producing crops vital for the year-round survival, while back at home their first wives and slaves kept the farmsteads going over there. On top of this, we don't actually know precisely what the underlying motive was behind the invasions. Were the invaders just looking for a new home with better farming land, or were other pressures like lack of prospects or poor farmland back home? So, back to 449 AD, and Hengist and Horsa have been asked by Vortigern, King of Kent, to drive out the attacking Picts. Having successfully achieved their objective, they were given what was then an island, namely Thanet, by Vortigern, the island being 40 hides in size. The problem here is there are no regular areas for a hide, but it was supposed to support one family. But how large was a family? And that's open to debate. Asking close friends and family to join them, 5,000 cousins and new best friends arrive. Well, that is the exaggerated figure, but let's say more than were needed arrive. It wasn't far to travel, being just across the North Sea in the north of Netherlands. Just 6 years later, in 455, the ASC tells us that Hengist and Horsa fought Vortigern and Horsa was killed in the battle. Basically, the new arrivals had revolted or seized their chance and taken control. Hengist and then his son Eyre continue expanding their area of influence and fighting and defeating the local Britons. In 488 AD, Eyre succeeded his father Hengist and continued to expand this kingdom. The Picts as a threat seem to recede and others are now attacking the coast. How the Anglo Saxons expanded their invasions but came to a standstill will be the next instalment. Global cooling and the remnants of Rome are part of the story. If you found this gradely, please click the like button and also recommend us to others. And please click the subscribe button and ring that bell to get weekly reminders. The videos will be coming out on Mondays each week, with perhaps occasional extra videos on a Thursday. I will be posting as we proceed. Thanks for listening.